First off, Will, thanks for joining the channel here today. This will be the first video of hopefully a lot, but I wanted to take the time to talk through the history of the Camaro. Had it for, this is 20 years in March that I've owned the car. Back in 2004, my dad was looking for a project that we could do while I was in high school, and his friend from high school had a lead on a 1979 Camaro that was sinking into the ground in the backyard, and was looking for a project. So we picked it up for about 300 bucks. I guess all in all about $500 if you count the milk crates and all the parts that came with it. So I've got the cow hood and the B&M shifter and all those parts that came with the car. So I picked it up when I was in 8th grade, and the plan was to get it done while I was in high school. So I had a goal of taking it to prom my senior year, and I did. It was awesome. I ended up getting to drive it prom senior year, and I even got it down the drag strip before I left for college. But going back to the origins of the car was a shell. Like I said, it was sinking into the ground, had moss and crap just growing all over it, holes in the floorboard. But overall, for this era of Camaro, it actually was pretty good. A little bit of rot in the rear subframe, but otherwise pretty clean car. Not too much in terms of rust, and especially in the body. There's a little bit of surface rust, but otherwise really good roller. So brought it back to the house, and my mom was definitely not impressed. Definitely some concern from my mom about being able to get the project done. Definitely more than I could bite off, or at least that's what it seemed like. So I worked at a grocery store. I started working at a grocery store, and that's really where all my money went, was to the car. Pretty much paid for everything on a high school budget. Now, my dad's a mechanic, and I was fortunate that he had a lot of connections and could do a lot of the work with me, and so I was fortunate in that regard. That, if I was doing it on my own, a lot of the money, or I just wouldn't have been able to afford it. Building the engine ourselves, and his friend was the body guy that did the work on the car, which saved a lot of money. So yeah, like I said, I'd say 75% of the car was through a grocery store job, and then 25% was probably picked up by my dad in terms of labor and labor trade. The plan was to trade in my dirt bike for a Chevy pickup. I think it was a 68, maybe 72 square body, and it had a small block Chevy. We were going to just take the engine and do a refresh and then swap. And so as you can see by the pictures, my cousin and I, one summer afternoon, decided to swap or pull out the engine. And as we were doing that, I dropped the pan. Dropped the pan after we had pulled the engine out, and noticed that a piston skirt was in the oil pan. So the plan to take that engine and put it in the Camaro kind of blew up, so to speak. And we really only salvaged the crank and the heads off that block. Everything else we just didn't feel like was a smart decision to go with. So I don't actually know the story of how my dad acquired the engine that was first put in the car. But one Christmas I woke up and had a rotating assembly in the garage, and that was the basis for the power plant that we initially put in the car. Another friend of my dad's was the guy that did all the port work on the heads. So he, ported them out, and they were a really nice set of heads. We paired that with a mild comp cam, flat tapping cam. So I'd say at the crank, the engine probably had 325 to 350 horsepower, which was definitely plenty for what I was doing at the time, and was affordable for the budget. We ended up marrying that to rebuilt turbo 350 with the appropriate stall. I think it was probably 22 to 2500 RPM, and that was the basis for the overall power plant. So after we got all the mechanical stuff done on the Camaro, all the way to running and driving, that's when we really focused on the body work and getting it ready for paint. Other than doing the floor, rewelding the, other than doing the floorboards or floor pans, the body work really waited until after we mechanically got it all sorted. Um, that's kind of when I took a back seat and watched the process rather than was more hands on. So my dad's friend's the one that did the paint and body work on it. Kind of helped me pick colors and do that whole process. So I remember distinctly sitting down, in the garage with a Duplicolor, or excuse me, a PPG catalog and going through the colors that they had available. And I landed on the dark green that we ended up painting, and I just fell in love with it. Dark green has been my favorite color my whole life. And so the initial plan was to do dark green with white pearl stripes. I just really love that look, a dark color matched with a white pearl. Really, I think that pops really well. Um, but as we were talking, my dad's friend had just done a bike, motorcycle, and had some tan left over. And I'd never seen it, but he was like, "Man, I think it would look really well with the dark green." So I trusted his opinion, and 20 years later, 15 years later, whatever it is, I absolutely wouldn't change a thing about the color combo. The tan goes really well with the interior, and I just think that green and tan combination just it's really really nice. So my junior years when we transitioned from all the mechanical side of things to the paint and body, and he, I think over a couple months, took everything down to bare metal and brought it all back up. And as I previously mentioned, there really wasn't much rust on the car, on the body portion of the car, so it really wasn't that terrible. A little bit of Bondo to fix a few dents, or at least try to match up a few dents. The 79s, they kind of come to a point in the middle, and you could tell whenever this car was actually in operational status, somebody either opened their door or a shopping cart or something hit it right at that seam. So I think that's about the only spot that has a significant amount of Bondo or body filler to try to make that seam go away or that dent go away. Um, Regardless, did all the body work and then sprayed in our garage. So this paint job's a garage a garage paint job. We didn't have a paint booth or anything. We just laid a bunch of tarps over my dad's tools and other stuff that was in the garage. And did I think the paint, it was cold enough. I think when we did the paint job, it was cold enough that kept most of the bugs away, but warm enough that we could keep doors open and kind of let it go through the curing process. So there's a handful of spots where mosquitoes and bugs met their demise, but overall, uh, the paint job came out really nice for a garage paint job. I think we have somewhere around 2 to 3 base coats, and then like 4 to 6 uh, clear coat clear coats. And then he wet sanded and buffed. So like for a kid in high school, literally couldn't have been more happy with how the paint job turned out. So after the paint job, we put the interior in. Most of the lighter tan interior is Duplicolor like Flex spray paint, which um, has held up relatively well over the years. To be honest with you, it absolutely needs to be refreshed. The paint or the interior is a little rough right now, and I think I think eventually I'll make it look a little nicer, but that stuff doesn't make you go faster, so it always takes a back seat. Anyhow, got the car put back together after paint, and that brought me to my senior year, which again, like just in time for all the senior year things. So got my high school senior photos with it. I got to go take it to prom, and then after I graduated high school, went to college. that summer, my first summer back, is when we got to take it out to the drag strip. So we took it to Kilcare Dragway or Drag Strip. It's in Xenia, Ohio. It's a really nice quarter-mile strip. It was really hot that day and had a significant amount of fuel issues. Uh, I think we were either vapor locking or something. It just wasn't sorted by any means. We got the car running, but we didn't get it sorted all the way through. It had probably a underpowered radiator um, put in it, so we were struggling to keep it cool. And I think it was in the 14s. Nothing to write home about by any means, but whatever. I got to take to the drag strip. From there, the car really just stayed at my parents' house throughout the rest of my college days. I'd come home, drive it on trips home, and then after that, graduated college, commissioned into the Air Force, and then I'm on active duty, so I move around quite a bit. Uh, and in 2016, I was in South Dakota and convinced my wife it was a good idea to get the car transported out west, out our way from Ohio. And it's kind of a funny story. She was like, "Yeah, we'll do it, but it'll be just our luck that we'll get orders to go the opposite direction, and and shortly after have to drive the same direction back to our new base." And sure enough, so my parent, well, first off, met my friend and I in Iowa. I think met in Des Moines. I think that was close to the halfway point. So my buddy Andrew and I did a kind of a cannonball run from Rapid City to Des Moines. Uh, got the car from my parents, and then brought it back. And that whole trip was like a Friday afternoon to a Sunday night trip. So very quick, a lot of driving, but it didn't matter. Car was back in my possession, and I actually had a big boy job to be able to start doing some of the bigger projects I wanted to do. Um, but then again, to get back to the funny part of the story, that was March of 2016, and summer of 16 got orders to go be stationed in Eastern Virginia. So, essentially we met my parents in Des Moines, drove back. That whole trip was a long drive, and then shortly after got orders to to drive all the way back east, and just so happened to stop back in Ohio to visit family and that sort of thing before moving all the way to the East Coast. So again, I don't really care. Got the car back in my possession, and that's really when I started fixing all the corners that were cut. Some of the bigger upgrades that I did from 16 to like 20 time frame was upgrade the radiator. So went from a really undercooled radiator to a 3-row champion radiator, that aluminum radiator that just it keeps the thing super cool. I've never really had any issues with overheating. Highly recommend that product. And then we also upgraded the transmission. Um, Same transmission, Turbo 350, but went from a unknown rebuilt to a TCI Street Fighter transmission, and it was pretty cool. It's like a semi-manual valve body, so you can shift through the gears, but then you can also throw it in drive, and it'll shift for you. Since we built the car, always had an issue with the oil leak. So oil pan in the back, kind of where the rear main seal is, would always drip oil, and it got real frustrating because it was just catching the torque converter flywheel and just slinging it all over the headers and exhaust. And it was frustrating because you get the smell of burning oil, and you never knew, like, oh man, is this I always had the fear of it catching on fire. I think that was probably a little overblown. It'd take a lot of oil on the headers to catch fire, but regardless, I never really could peacefully enjoy the car because I was always worried about oil leaks. So I convinced my wife that, again, it was a really good idea to fix that oil leak with a new engine, because I'd changed the oil pan like 3 times. And if anybody's changed the oil pan on a small block Chevy in a 1979 Camaro, you understand that you have to raise the engine off the mounts, chalk it with like 2x4s between the mounts and the engine, and then get in there and like remove the oil pump. And it's just it is it is like the least fun job to do, and I had to do that like 3 times trying to get it fixed. And I'll completely chalk it up to user error. I was probably too concerned about torquing the bolts too tight, and I don't think I got them snug enough. Plus, you're on your back trying to hold the oil pan up, get the bolts set. It was the worst. So again, to fix the oil leak of an oil pan, I decided to go with the Blueprint Engines 383 stroker, which has been just the best. Uh, it's a season, or sorry, it's not a season block. It's the new block manufactured by Blueprint. I think it's got like 460 horsepower and somewhere around 450 foot-pounds of torque uh, at the crank, and it lights them up on demand. It is just so much fun, and really has allowed me to put all the oil leak nonsense behind me and focus on upgrading the car. So at this point, I was stationed in Omaha, Nebraska, and actually that's where my wife's parents live, and they have a really big garage, a big 3-car garage. And so before we got stationed here in South Georgia, that was when I decided to make the swap, because I had literally all the space in the world to do it. So got the engine from Blueprint. It was a really quick delivery because they're just a couple hours west of Omaha, and reached out to my cousin, who him and I have been really good friends our whole life, and he came out, flew out from Ohio to help me do the install. We did the swap in 2.5 days. I think he flew out Friday night and flew out on Sunday. So it was cool. We got a lot of footage, as you can see from the pictures and the videos, and literally got it done enough just to drive. There was a handful of things I needed to um, tighten up and make a little more reliable. But that's all I needed to do, because literally a week later, movers came to pack up our stuff. We moved down here to South Georgia. So once we got to South Georgia, that's when I decided to kind of transition away from the what we initially wanted the car to be, for drag racing, and started looking at autocross as a viable option to have fun with. So, man, I'll tell you, as I looked into autocross, the second gen community in the track day autocross world is deep, and way cooler than I expected. And just parts availability and knowledge of the sport, really it doesn't lack any of that. So uh, decided, okay, like what's the first step to transition to autocross from drag racing, and suspension is what I decided to go with. Um, the suspension, everything was stock from 1979. It might have had upgraded shocks, uh, but bottom line, it all was stock. So went with CPP, upper and lower tubular control arms, uh, and some BMI lowering springs. From there, I did 2-inch lowering Hotchkiss rear leaf springs, and then KYB shocks all around. Kind of a cheap alternative just for a quick upgrade. Later on, I'll do some different shocks. Um, yeah, so that gave the car a really awesome stance. Right now I'm happy with it. I know uh, coilovers would be the next upgrade to get the nose down just a little bit more. It doesn't have a squat, but it's a little higher in the front than I'd wanted. Then after I did the suspension, started focusing on wheels and tires. So it had old American Racing 15 inches in the back and 14s in the front that were wrapped in 275 60/15s, and then like 205s up front. So it had that day 2 muscle car drag racing stance. Ended up going with US Mags 18 Ramblers and wrapped them in Michelin Pilot Super Sports, 275 40 18s in the back and 245 40 18s in the front. And that was really what I did ahead of my first autocross event. And went out to our local club. It's up in Moultrie, Georgia, Red Hills SCCA Club, and had my first event. And man, it was like I've never had more fun with this car in my entire life. Made a lot of gains because I was obviously timid at first. So, went from like an 82nd round to I think I got in the 60s. Um, and so pretty much everything up until this point has now been focused on autocross. I've got a roll bar coming in um, from Pro Tour and F Body. That'll allow me to get the harness for the Corbo seat, and really from there, that's all I have planned for now. Obviously brakes and steering box and all the things that you potentially could do for upgrades. That is in the future, but um, for now, this is what I'm going with.